to the village people. In the last video, we took a look at some other kind of homebrew races, and you ended up voting in the poll for the Deep Dragonborn. So, in this video, we'll take a look at Deep Dragonborn, their history, their culture, and what sets them apart as a playable race from other Dragonborn within D&D 5th edition. So without any further ado, let's look at the Deep Dragonborn. Dragonborn are typical Dragonborn in terms of appearance, kind of the erect humanoid figure with lack of wings or anything, but draconic head and scales and other kind of features, the kind of typical to other Dragonborn. Deep Dragonborn, however, in terms of their appearance, tend to have more pale gray, almost kind of a stone-like texture to their scales, with little bits and highlights of these scales being a vibrant color and almost luminescent to some degree, even in the dark. This typically isn't necessarily a feature of the scale itself, though some Deep Dragonborn colonies have developed this unique bioluminescent pigmentation. It typically is more a symbiosis between themselves and the various things that might grow within the mushroom groves that they actually live in. And so, historically speaking, what you're ending up looking at for a Deep Dragonborn is a Deep Dragonborn kind of clan is almost for the most part going to have usually come from a deep dragon's influence to some extent. It can be something that comes out from Dragonborn moving and living in the Underdark for a longer period of time to the point where they evolve into being Deep Dragonborn, affected by the spores of different mushrooms or other fungi that are down there. But for the most part, what you're going to end up seeing is Deep Dragonborn being kind of the product of dragon, like a deep dragon's influence in an area. Now, what that means is they don't necessarily just spawn from nothing, but a deep dragon will usually take them from one area where they have their lair, and if they do end up moving, they'll move this colony with them, either intentionally or unintentionally. So as a basis, taking another step back in terms of history, Deep Dragonborn, at least from what we know now, live deep beneath the surface of the earth within mushroom groves. They rely on these pockets of kind of relative safety where they carve their homes into the rock and rely on the fungal growth for both food and protection. Life in the Underdark is extremely dangerous, and so these communities survive by living as close to the surface as their sunlight sensitivity might even allow, relying on being far away and difficult to access as defense mechanisms. Kind of the same way that the hobbits survive when it comes to like the Lord of the Rings. The Shire isn't highly fortified. It's just really far away from literally everything else. And so they have their own kind of peaceful lifestyle. And so they have that kind of benefit of being out of the way. So living within the Underdark, there's going to be wayward threats and other things. But for the most part, there's massive drow cultures and Duergar cultures and other threats, an aboleth or a mind flayer civilization kind of thing, and all of that's deeper. And so they just don't go that deep. They rely on being as close to the surface as they can allow. Basically, they try to live in the sweet spot between where it just doesn't make sense for dwarves to dig down and it doesn't make sense for anything else to try to come up. And so they kind of take advantage of that sweet spot. They are otherwise protected as an additional layer of protection, either with a symbiotic relationship between themselves and one of two different entities. Typically, this is because they either have a deep dragon patron, so to speak, that serves as a relative head of their clan, while the deep dragonborn kind of follow around it as the true dragon, deep dragonborn, exists within the space. it ends up kind of being a guardian or protector by virtue of existing. Or another kind of creature that they might end up finding a relationship with are myconids. They can end up living peacefully and happily with a colony of myconids by kind of communicating and working with them to protect each other when it comes to these things. And so if a group of deep dragonborn that historically has lived with a deep dragon that has now either abandoned them or was killed, they can end up moving in, so to speak, with a colony of myconids to end up protecting themselves and serving as a more, sturdy flesh-based entity that can do a little bit more physical fighting and everything compared to a myconid and the myconid sovereign. This kind of relationship can end up being beneficial to them for the most part, just because they have a little bit more protection and rapport with those kinds of symbiotic relationships more than anything else. Now, they are extremely limited in terms of their contact with outside groups. Most of the contact that they'll have with an outside group that they run into within the Underdark is a threatening scenario. And so they end up hiding for the most part and capturing any interlopers that might find themselves into their clan, using fear and intimidation tactics as kind of a basic hallmark of their culture, utilizing stealth, intimidation should be actually caught, and then breath weapons that they do end up having that are a little bit more spore based to their advantage. From a cultural perspective, deep dragonborn rely on illusion and deception paired with an almost extreme exposure policy, limit kind of the risk in terms of that kind of policy to the clan overall. They utilize a specialized concoction of their own spores. Deep dragonborn, to some extent, produce a certain concoction of unique spores within their body, living within mushroom groves and with myconids or deep dragons, whatever it might be, but relying on a more fungal based diet and living within an area that is extremely influenced by fungus have kind of made it so that they are, to some extent, heavily spore-based fungus creatures, though still dragonborn to the majority of their own right. They have a concoction of their own produced spores on a regular basis that they keep handy. And each individual deep dragonborn that does leave the clan's homeland or the clan's place within their grove for any length of time swears an oath to the clan themselves. This oath is kind of one where they swear to die for the clan. They take this concoction and they kind of end up succumbing to their own spores and rapidly decompose, being overtaken rapidly by the spores that they've concentrated within this potion. It's kind of a capsule, almost like a cyanide capsule, but there's nothing really left of you after that point. There's just, you are a mass of fungus, and so they leave behind no real trace of their presence at that point. They are driven by a continuous drive for self-improvement, just like most all Dragonborn are. They value skill and excellence in all of their endeavors, and they hate to fail. They push themselves to the extreme, but they end up kind of taking that another step farther as a deep Dragonborn. Being capable within this area means that within your grove, being capable isn't just I need to be a master of my craft. because I want to. It's I need to be a master of my craft because I need to show that I'm pulling my own weight, that I am earning my food, that I am not wasting the air that I breathe. It is extreme what they're able to rely on and benefit from in terms of being extremely skilled. And so from an extremely young age, they are raised by the clan to lean into being the best at something, anything, whatever they find the most beneficial, but also, prove yourself worthy of existing within this extremely limited space. Any expansion that they're able to make is extremely dangerous to undertake. Any expansions mean that they end up having to carve their way through stone or carry their grove further and try to cultivate the expansion of this fungi forest, making it so that even as they spread, it's harder and harder for themselves to remain hidden because, it's if you're a bigger target, how are you even going to hide? So carving themselves into more intricate tunnels and carving more homes is a lot harder than just limiting the existence of your clan to the people that are worthwhile. While they are kind of wary of leaving the safety of their grove, any deep dragonborn that does abandon the clan to any extent is marked as a traitor and can never return. They are not spoken of, they are expunged from clan record, and basically then if anybody within a deep dragonborn clan sees another deep dragonborn that they either recognize as a traitor or don't recognize at all, it is kill on sight. They do not want their lifestyle threatened by somebody there. And so any deep dragonborn that does leave is a threat. But any deep dragonborn that does leave tends to make an adept assassin or a spy, with their secretive nature and powerful breath weapon lending itself to their capabilities very nicely. Exactly what does it look like to play a deep dragonborn? As a deep dragonborn living within the Underdark, you gain a variety of different traits. Your ability scores increase. You have increased stealth and charisma. Basically, you have a increase of 1 to your dexterity and an increase of 2 to your charisma. And this is reflected in your lifestyle training of being stealthy. And if you aren't stealthy enough, being intimidating, being scary. Just enough that maybe something doesn't mess with you. It is the equivalent of stay in the shadows, and if something reaches for that shadow, growl loud enough that they don't bother looking any deeper. You also have an Underdark resilience trait. You have advantage on saving throws against the frightened condition, and you can choose either resistance to poison damage or resistance to psychic damage. This resistance is reflected on kind of the exposure to different spores. They're either toxic or mess with your head. And so those kinds of spores and that resistance is reflected of that specific exposure. And so that's up to you what you would want to choose. Did you have more toxic or more psychedelic mushrooms in your homeland area? That's up to you. In addition, you also have, as the only dragonborn otherwise to have it, dark vision out to 60 feet. You are able to see in the dark out to 60 feet, typical dark vision caveats is it's in shades of gray, you don't discern color, those kinds of things. But being from the Underdark, you have dark vision in and of itself. Whereas other Dragonborn, weirdly enough, as I always thought, everybody has dark vision. I'm sure Dragonborn do. Dragonborn do not. They do not have dark vision for the most part. And so, as a deep Dragonborn, you benefit from dark vision. The final trait that you have, and it scales as you level, is a breath weapon. This breath weapon is a spore breath weapon. Whenever you take the attack action on your turn, you can replace one of your attacks with an exhalation of energy. In this case, a mix of energy and spores that your body naturally creates within a 15-foot cone. Any creature in the area must make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failed save, the creature takes 1d10 psychic damage and becomes frightened of you for up to a minute. And they can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns to avoid that frightened condition. On a successful save, it takes half as much damage and is not frightened. This damage does increase as you level up from 1d10 all the way up to, at like 17th level, 4d10. And so this kind of makes it so that you have the effect of being scary to some extent. You can literally impose the frightened condition by having these terrifying spores that deal psychic damage and deal that frightened condition onto another creature. This is relatively indicative of your time within the Grove and within your species, your specific race, as a deep Dragonborn, producing spores within their body, within your bloodstream, that can be kind of exhaled as a concentrated breath weapon. Going back earlier, this breath weapon, even more concentrated into that potion form, during a kind of a special alchemical process, is their kind of cyanide capsule potion. And so deep Dragonborn do produce spores in and of themselves. This doesn't make them a fungus or a plant by any means, but their bodies have adapted to kind of the same way that if you were to look at a cell of your own human body, you would see mitochondria. It has long been proposed that mitochondria were a parallel species that our cells evolved to integrate, and it just made sense because, you know, they provided energy to the rest of the cell. I mean, that kind of a thing ends up being beneficial. So you can easily picture how a deep Dragonborn might benefit from, over time, evolving from either being a normal Dragonborn of some color or scale variety, then adapting over time, over generations, to take in the spores of the grove that they live within, and integrate that into their very cells of being, having a variety of different compounds that their body generates to create this breath weapon in and of itself. So the one thing that I will say is I was going to make the spore breath attack a poison breath attack, but given the number of things that are resistant, if not outright immune to poison, I wanted to lean more on the psychedelic aspect of this. So if you were going to run a deep Dragonborn, you can choose to have this breath weapon's psychic damage instead be poison damage, should you choose. It's just I leaned for psychic because of just how laughable poison becomes. I mean, most playable classes gain resistance, if not immunity, to poison relatively quickly, and many of the monsters, especially things like demons and dragons and other things like that, just gain outright immunity to poison, which makes it feel like if your breath weapon doesn't do anything, what's the point? And so to make it more interesting, you can have it be psychic or poison or a mix of both. Work with your DM, of course, and they'll kind of help guide you on what makes the most sense. Otherwise, that's it for the Deep Dragonborn. Thank you all for watching. Let me know in the poll on the community tab here which of the next kind of racial groups you would like to see. Choose from those three, and otherwise I will see you all in the next video. Bye!